When we read about wealth in the ancient world, we often picture bags of gold coins. But for most of biblical history, money simply didn't exist. True wealth was measured in massive flocks of sheep, heavy sacks of grain, and bustling markets filled with spices and textiles. If you wanted to trade, you didn't hand over a minted coin. You used hack silver, pieces of raw, chopped silver. Every single transaction required merchants to carefully weigh these fragments on small bronze scales with stone weights. The metal had to be examined, and sometimes cut on a blacksmith's anvil to ensure it was pure. Trust was everything, and a simple clay tablet was your only receipt. It wasn't until the rise of mighty empires that the first true coins, like the golden Persian daric and the Greek drachma, began to shine in the sun. But even then, the economy was deeply tied to the land, to olive groves and vineyards. Divine laws were written on parchment scrolls, commanding debts to be forgiven every jubilee year. However, as the Roman Empire expanded, taxation became an inescapable burden. The silver denarius bearing the emperor's face became the currency of absolute power, tightly gripped by the poor and used by legionaries in the streets. At the heart of the ancient economy stood the magnificent Second Temple in Jerusalem. Here, money changers sat at heavy tables, exchanging chaotic foreign currency for the pure silver Tyrian shekel required for the temple tax. The inequality was staggering. A poor widow might offer 2 tiny, almost worthless copper coins, while wealthy merchants in purple robes hoarded heavy chests of treasure. Famously, 30 pieces of silver became the ultimate price of betrayal. Wealth flowed relentlessly across the Mediterranean on merchant ships and through the vast deserts on camel caravans. Yet, for the vast majority of people, a simple stack of fresh bread meant survival, and falling into debt meant literal slavery. Today, the coins of ancient kings and emperors lie buried and forgotten in the desert sand. But the ancient economic struggle between wealth, debt, and survival remains as timeless as the sunrise over these ancient cities. Welcome to the chaotic, vibrant heart of the ancient world, the marketplace. In the Bronze and Iron Ages, long before minted coins jingled in anyone's pockets, trade was a complex and often dangerous dance of trust and deception. Imagine walking into a bustling bazaar in ancient Babylon, Canaan, or Egypt. The air is thick with the smell of exotic spices, roasting meats, and the sweat of merchants haggling over textiles and grain. But when it came time to pay, how did they do it? The answer lies in a system based entirely on weight. The standard currency was silver, but not in neat round coins. They used hack silver, scrap silver, broken jewelry, and roughly chopped ingots. Every merchant carried a small leather pouch containing a personal set of bronze balancing scales and carved stone weights. When a deal was struck, the buyer would place their silver fragments onto one side of the scale, and the seller would match it with their stone weights on the other. This is where the true economic warfare happened. The system was ripe for fraud. A dishonest merchant might carry 2 sets of weights, a heavier set for buying to get more silver from you, and a lighter set for selling to give you less goods. This practice was so rampant that ancient law codes, including the Bible, explicitly condemned the use of diverse weights and measures, calling them an abomination. Prophets railed against the deceitful balances of the wealthy elite who cheated the poor out of their hard-earned survival. Every transaction was a tense negotiation, requiring sharp eyes and deep suspicion. You had to constantly inspect the silver to make sure it wasn't mixed with cheaper metals like lead or copper. It was an era where your survival depended not just on how much wealth you had, but on how accurately you could weigh it. For thousands of years, the world weighed its wealth. But as empires expanded, a revolutionary idea emerged from the Kingdom of Lydia in Western Asia Minor. What if you didn't have to weigh the metal every time? What if a king stamped his royal seal on a piece of metal, guaranteeing its weight and purity? This simple idea birthed the first true coins. When the mighty Persian Empire conquered Lydia, they adopted this brilliant invention. Soon, the golden Persian daric, stamped with the image of a king holding a bow, became the first internationally recognized currency. It funded vast armies and built sprawling cities. The psychological shift was monumental. People stopped weighing their money and started counting it. Trust shifted from the merchant scale to the authority of the state, but it was the Greeks who truly democratized the coin. Following the conquests of Alexander the Great, Greek culture and economy flooded the ancient Near East. The silver tetradrachm of Athens, famously stamped with the owl of Athena, filled the markets of Judea and beyond. Coins became tiny, glittering billboards of propaganda, carrying the faces of rulers and gods into the hands of ordinary people. By the time the Old Testament closed and the intertestamental period began, the economic landscape was unrecognizable. You no longer just needed silver. You needed the right coin. This standardization sparked an explosion of international trade, but it also introduced a new kind of poverty, as taxes and debts were now demanded in cold, hard, state-issued cash. In the ancient Near East, the economy was a matter of life and death. If a harvest failed or disease struck the flock, a family didn't just lose their income, they faced absolute ruin. Without banks, safety nets, or bankruptcy protection, desperate farmers had to borrow grain or silver from wealthy landowners at crushing interest rates. When they couldn't pay, the consequences were devastating. First, they lost their ancestral land. Then, they had to sell their own children, and eventually themselves, into debt slavery. This grim reality was the engine of ancient empires, creating massive, unbreakable inequality. But within the pages of the Torah, a radically different economic vision emerged. The biblical laws of ancient Israel introduced shocking concepts designed to shatter these cycles of generational poverty. Charging interest to a fellow Israelite in need was strictly forbidden. Furthermore, the law mandated the Shemitah, a Sabbath year occurring every 7 years, where all debts were entirely canceled and Hebrew slaves were set free. The climax of this divine economy was the Jubilee, the 50th year. When the ram's horn sounded on the Day of Atonement, all leased or foreclosed land was returned to its original ancestral owners. It was an economic reset button, a profound declaration that the land belonged ultimately to God, and human beings were not commodities to be permanently bought and sold. While historians debate how strictly the Jubilee was actually enforced, its mere existence as a legal and moral framework was a revolutionary critique of human greed. It established the powerful idea that true justice requires an economy built on mercy, not just profit. By the 1st century, the economic landscape of the ancient Near East had fallen under the massive iron shadow of the Roman Empire. The economy was no longer just about local survival. It was a vast, highly organized machine, designed to extract wealth from the provinces and funnel it directly into the heart of Rome. At the center of this machine was a single, iconic coin, the silver denarius. Bearing the stamped profile and the divine claims of the Roman emperor, the denarius was more than just currency. It was a piece of imperial propaganda carried in every pocket. For the people of occupied Judea, this coin was a constant, bitter reminder of their subjugation. Rome's thirst for revenue was unquenchable. They imposed tolls on roads, taxes on harvests, and a strict poll tax simply for the right to exist. To collect these funds, the empire outsourced the job to local contractors known as publicans, or tax collectors. These men paid Rome a fixed amount up front and then squeezed as much profit as they could out of their own neighbors. Because of this legally sanctioned extortion, tax collectors were despised, treated as outcasts, thieves, and traitors to their own people. This heavy burden of taxation created a society boiling with resentment and deep economic anxiety. When a poor carpenter from Nazareth was famously asked whether it was lawful to pay taxes to Rome, the trap was set. He asked to see a denarius, pointed to the emperor's face, and delivered the brilliant paradigm-shifting response: "Render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God's." The Roman economy was built on power, steel, and forced tribute, but it inadvertently set the stage for a spiritual rebellion that would outlast the empire itself. If you wanted to understand the true financial heart of ancient Judea, you didn't look at the Roman governor's palace. You looked at the monumental Second Temple in Jerusalem. It wasn't just a place of worship. It was the central bank, the national treasury, and a booming economic hub. According to Jewish law, every adult male had to pay an annual temple tax of half a shekel. But there was a problem. Pilgrims traveled from all corners of the Roman Empire, bringing a chaotic mix of Greek, Egyptian, and Roman coins. These foreign coins were stamped with the faces of pagan gods and emperors, making them ritually impure and unacceptable for sacred use. Enter the money changers. Set up in the vast court of the Gentiles, these financial brokers exchanged foreign currency for the Tyrian shekel, a thick silver coin prized for its high purity. But this exchange came at a steep price. The money changers charged exorbitant fees, profiting massively off the religious devotion of ordinary people. Alongside them, merchants sold pre-approved, unblemished doves, sheep, and oxen at highly inflated prices for sacrifices. The sacred courtyard was transformed into a deafening, chaotic, and highly lucrative bazaar. This is the crucial context behind one of the most dramatic moments in the New Testament, when a furious Jesus of Nazareth braided a whip of cords, overturned the heavy tables of the money changers, and sent their coins scattering across the stone floor. It was a direct, explosive protest against a corrupt system that had turned a house of prayer into a den of thieves, weaponizing faith for financial gain. We have traced the evolution of money from massive flocks of sheep to rough silver fragments, and from stamped imperial coins to the noisy tables of the temple money changers. But what is the true economic legacy of the ancient world? Ultimately, the biblical narrative forces us to confront the true nature of wealth. We see this climax in the most infamous transaction in human history: 30 pieces of silver, the standard price of a slave, paid to Judas Iscariot to betray Jesus. It stands as the ultimate symbol of how cold, hard currency can corrupt the human soul. Yet, the New Testament constantly subverts this material economy. It praises the poor widow who dropped 2 nearly worthless copper coins into the offering box, declaring she gave more than the billionaires of her day because she gave everything she had to live on. It warns that it is easier for a massive camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of God. The ancient economy was a brutal, unforgiving system of debt, slavery, and imperial extraction. But the revolutionary voices of the prophets and Jesus left us with an alternative vision. They taught that human beings have inherent, divine value that cannot be weighed on bronze scales or stamped on a Roman denarius. Today, the grand temples have fallen, the Roman Empire is dust, and those once powerful silver coins are mostly locked away in museum glass cases. But the questions they raise remain entirely relevant. What do we value? Who do we exclude? And will we build an economy based on ruthless extraction, or one modeled on the radical mercy of the Jubilee? The ancient world doesn't just show us how money worked. It asks us what money is actually for.